Hey, happy Wednesday morning, everyone. Welcome back to Morning Musings. Boy, I appreciate you being with me. Thank you so much for all the great comments. I do appreciate that so very much. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We're currently looking at the prophetic fountain from which 1 Corinthians chapter 15 flows. Paul said that resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15 would be in fulfillment of Isaiah chapter 25. You know, one of the most disturbing things to me that I encounter repeatedly is a hermeneutic that is so fundamentally flawed, that does not understand the Hebraic way of looking at Scripture. I pointed out in the last video that, as noted world-class scholars tell us, okay, I didn't invent this concept. World-class scholars such as Richard Hayes, N.T. Wright, R.T. France, and a host of others, they tell us that when a New Testament writer or speaker quotes just a little segment of an Old Testament prophetic text, that in the Hebraic mind of the first century, in the ancient rabbinic way or Hebraic way of doing things, that would bring that entire prophetic text to the mind of the listener or reader. And yet I encounter people all the time who go so far as to say, well, you know, in 1 Corinthians 15, when Paul said, "Death shall be destroyed," or "death shall be swallowed up," pardon me, he was just using accommodative language. He wasn't really citing Isaiah 25 as a prophecy of the resurrection. Really? Paul said his doctrine of the resurrection was from Moses, the law, and the prophets, Acts 24:14 and following. So, if Isaiah didn't predict the resurrection, then why was Paul, who said the Old Testament did predict the resurrection, why did Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 say the resurrection would be in fulfillment of Isaiah 25? Do you see the problem here? Well, I've got to go on. I want you to notice that Isaiah chapter 24, part of that overall prophetic context, Isaiah 24, after predicting and in predicting the destruction of the earth and the heavens and the earth as a result of Israel's violation of the law, says this, Isaiah 24:21 and following. It shall come to pass in that day. What day? Destruction of the earth. Verse 10 or verse 19 and 20. It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord will punish on high the host of exalted ones, and on the earth the kings of the earth. They will be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and will shut them up in prison. After many days they will be punished. Now watch this. Then the moon will be disgraced, and the sun ashamed, for the Lord of hosts will reign on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem. So what do we have? We have the destruction of, quote, heaven and earth. But remember, this is the time of the judgment of Israel for violating Torah. Oh, but wait. At this time of this destruction of the city and the people dwelling in the midst of the land, this would be the time in which Yahweh would rule gloriously in Zion. Now look, this motif of Zion and eschatology is incredibly rich. William Bell and I did an entire series on the significance of Zion just from the book of Isaiah. All right? We did that on Two Guys in a Bible on fulfillradio.com. You can go there and search the archives. I want to tell you, it's an incredibly, incredibly rich study. The point being that here is a prophecy of the judgment of Old Covenant Israel, the destruction of Jerusalem as a result of Israel's violation of the Old Testament covenant. And it would be at that time that heaven and earth would be destroyed, but at that time, what? Yahweh would rule gloriously. That's the kingdom. What is Paul talking about in 1 Corinthians 15? Paul is talking about the resurrection at the time of the end. And oh, by the way, it is the time of the end of the law. That was the strength of sin. In numerous formal public debates, and in fact, in my recent debate with Dr. David Hester, in response to written questions, Dr. David Hester defined the law as the strength of sin as the law of Moses. Now, he affirmed that first debate, he affirmed that second debate, until I kept pressing and pressing and pressing and pointing out that means that the resurrection is at the end of the law of Moses. Therefore, if the resurrection is still future, guess what? The law of Moses endures until the end of time. Do you know what Dr. David Hester did? In his very last speech, when of course I'd had no opportunity to respond and to point out to the audience what a radical debate conversion it was, Dr. David Hester completely redefined the law of this as the strength of sin as the moral law. Totally changed his position, because his answer that he really honestly believed before being entrapped, his answer destroyed his eschatology. But the point here, Isaiah 24, leading into chapter 25, is the judgment of Old Covenant Israel for violating that law. The resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15 is the time of the judgment of that law. Isaiah 24 is the time of the entrance into the kingdom in the judgment of those people of that old covenant. 1 Corinthians 15, flesh and blood shall not inherit the kingdom. Do you see these perfect parallels? Let me say once again, Isaiah 24 through 29 posits the resurrection at the time of the judgment of Old Covenant Israel for Israel's violation of the everlasting covenant. But it also posits that's the time, the resurrection. That's the time of the kingdom. That's the time of salvation. And this agrees 100% perfectly with 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Look, 1 Corinthians 15 is not about the end of time. It's not about the end of the Christian age. It is the time of the end of the Old Covenant age of Israel that came when the people who violated the everlasting covenant and the city that dwelt in the midst, or that sat in the midst of the land, that city of confusion, were destroyed. That was in AD 70. And we've got more to prove that, right, from Isaiah 25 itself. You don't want to miss it. Don't forget, get a copy of my book, The Resurrection of Daniel, chapter 12, Future or Fulfilled. Go to my website. By the way, did you realize that Daniel, his prophecy of the resurrection is drawing directly from Isaiah 26? Oh yeah, we'll have more on that. So go to my website, donkpreston.com. BibleProphecy.com, order this book, send me a note saying that you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll refund your shipping, saving you $5. Okay, we've got more on the prophetic source of Paul's resurrection doctrine in 1 Corinthians 15. We've got it on the flip side, so we'll see you there.